left field. Big fly for Mike Trout. 1-0 Halos. Ground ball to second base. Rhett Bollinger falls down, picks it up, fires the first. The Angels have no hit. The Seattle Mariners. That is drilled out to left field. The Angels are going to have a 1-0 lead. Anthony Rendell with a big fly, his third.
Hey guys, I'm Alex Curry.
This is Jo Adell here with the Los Angeles Angels.
Brendan Marsh.
This is Chris Rodriguez.
And you're listening to the All Angels Podcast.
And welcome to another All Angels Podcast interview special. This time is with MLB.com writer Rhett Bollinger. He's been the MLB.com Angels writer for about, I think this is his third season now. So he's been around the team a little bit. Again, we're going to play the full episode, the full interview here. And then we're also going to play a little part of it on our upcoming podcast. But again, this is something we're trying to do a little different. Is put the full interview here on our YouTube page. So please subscribe and send an alert. And so every time we post either a new episode of the podcast or a brand new interview, it will definitely drop here first. So with that being said, hope you enjoy the interview with Rhett Bollinger from MLB.com. And I want to welcome back our next guest, MLB beat writer, MLB.com beat writer, Rhett Bollinger. How you doing?
Doing good. Thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you back on. I'm glad you're one of the left Angel beat reporters that didn't leave. So that's always good to have you on. But let's start. We last time we talked, it was spring training. I feel like optimism was pretty high at that point. You know, a lot of these pitchers and a lot of players had really good spring. But the Angels kind of got off to a slow start. What happened between, the end of spring training where it seemed like a lot of guys were on a roll to kind of up until recently, they really struggled?
Yeah, you're right. Starting pitching definitely had a lot of troubles early on in the season. Guys that had great spring trainings didn't really carry over. Jose Quintana, especially, had a great spring, wasn't walking anybody, and then got to the regular season and lost all of his control, it seemed like, especially early on in the year. Alex Cobb, same thing, had a great spring and showed some glimpses of it early in the year, but wasn't quite the same, and then got hurt and came back, and he's been a lot better since then. I saw some inconsistencies from guys like Heaney and Bundy and Canning. Ohtani's been pretty good since the start, but also missed some time too with his blister that limited him to only a few starts there in April. So some of it was injury, with the blisters, I guess, with Cobb and with Ohtani, but for the most part early on, just not enough consistency out of the rotation. It has been better, and that's the reason why they've been playing a lot better the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks or so. But early in the year, like you said, that pitching was good in spring training. Didn't really carry over, and in the days where they were good, it seemed like were the times where the bullpen would struggle. So if it wasn't the bullpen, it was the rotation. They couldn't really ever get anything consistent going for both of them at the same time.
And you kind of mentioned it a little bit too, Ohtani, pitching and hitting a lot more this year than I think we've seen him at all in the past, especially with not really getting the day off before and after. He's done great. I think he's a front runner, obviously, for AL MVP. Was this kind of expected, this kind of start to a season as far as hitting everything out, striking everybody out? Was this kind of expected?
I think there was a hope that he could do this, but I don't think anybody really thought he was going to play this much. You kept hearing, during the winter meetings and during talks with Joe and even during spring training that they were going to no restrictions on Ohtani and all that. But to a lot of us, it still meant, okay, no restrictions, but it still means he's probably going to be out of the lineup the day before it starts or maybe after it, maybe the day of, and he'll get, a decent amount of rest as a hitter. And but so far, as he's been pretty much playing every single game outside of those NL rules where he didn't play the outfield because it made sense. It would have been probably too much on him. So, yeah, I think that it's been pretty incredible what he's been able to do. Like you said, I think right now, along with, Toronto's Vladimir Guerrero Jr., they're kind of the two front runners right now for AL MVP. And Ohtani seems like every time every start, he's setting some new milestone and some new record that only like Babe Ruth or somebody had ever set before. So it really is amazing, and it's good for baseball. I think that everyone thought this could happen because of it happened in 2018 when he was a rookie. He really was this good too. But since the injuries and all that, kind of last year was pretty forgettable. There was some concern, like, is he going to be able to do this? And sure enough, he's basically erased all doubts and has really been probably the biggest storyline in baseball this year.
And you kind of mentioned it a little bit about, and we've seen it as Angel fans, Joe putting Ohtani in the outfield for like 1 or 2 innings just to kind of get him another at-bat when he's pitching. Is that outfield, him being in the outfield, is that something serious to look into the future? Like, obviously probably not right now, but could we see Ohtani at some point play the outfield in a 9-inning game, or is this kind of going to always be a spot thing to where just to get him an extra at bat?
That's a good question. I think there's a chance we could see it. I think that Joe's talked about how he thinks Ohtani is athletic enough and a good enough outfielder to pull it off and be a regular outfielder, or at least play out there every now and then. I just think right now, especially this first year doing this again, where he's really going full bore, I think it makes more sense to let him do like I said, a little stints of it. Maybe he plays 2 innings out there to get an extra at bat. Because otherwise, as much as DHing isn't like it's too taxing, it's not like he's playing the field. It's still a lot to do both. I mean, there's a reason why nobody's ever done it before, really, to hit and pitch like this. So to me, it made sense this year to kind of see what he can do. Don't put him in the outfield too much, but I think that in the future, there's a chance we can see more of it. And especially if he has, let's say, a minor injury where he can't pitch for a few weeks or something like that, I think we could see him just get more regular playing time in the outfield, maybe as part of that. But clearly, obviously, maybe not, because they wouldn't want him to throw from the outfield either. So, but it might be an injury, or maybe it's not, a throwing thing. So yeah, we'll see. I think long term, there's people have talked about maybe if he were to give up pitching, he'd have to be a position player. But I think at this point, with how good he's pitching, that's not really in the plans at all. I think the plans right now are to keep him a two-way player and then see where it goes from there. But right now, I think this year is proving that he can do both and be very productive at both.
And we are about a month away from the All-Star break, and you are a voter in the postseason awards. I don't know what you're voting on. I don't even know if you know what you're voting on at the end of this year. But if it's the AL MVP, and you mentioned Vlad Guerrero Jr., there's a handful of other guys out there that are kind of competing for that. But does Ohtani win it because of what he's doing that's historical, like you mentioned?
I think that's going to play a big role. If he were to continue this the rest of the season. Just because, like I said, it is so historic and we've never seen anything like this before. He'll have to keep it up, continue to hit home runs, and continue to have good starts and all that, and stay healthy the rest of the year. But right now, like I said, I think Vlad Guerrero Jr. with the power he's shown has been pretty amazing. But if Ohtani can even come close to that as a hitter, and then also be a very good pitcher on the on top of that, it'll probably put him over the top. So as of right now, I would think that he's still kind of the early favorite. But like I said, we're still not quite to the All-Star break. There's still time. It's too bad, Mike Trout was pretty much having an MVP type season too until his injury. And at this point now, he's pretty much, obviously out of that race, but chance he could be an all-star, but it also seems like there's a good chance he might not be ready to play in the all-star game either because of his calf strain.
And, as Mike Trout has been injured for feels like forever now, but the team hasn't necessarily struggled in his absence. They've actually have a winning record in that time. What has changed, or what has made that possible for the Angels to still kind of tread water waiting for him to come back?
I think, like we talked about earlier, the starting pitching's been a lot better. Even the bullpen's been better because of that, because they've had fewer innings to have to cover. And then we've seen some other guys step up. We've seen Max Stassi become one of the better hitting catchers in baseball, which has been really impressive. And Jared Walsh had a little bit of a slump there, but still one of the better first basemen in baseball so far this season. Ohtani's obviously carried that load. And we've seen guys step up like Taylor Ward has played pretty well in right field. Lagares has come through a few times out in center. And the big one too is Justin Upton. I don't know how Joe realized to put him in, leadoff spot. It would actually work. I remember thinking that it was totally crazy when he did it, because, Upton was outside of some power, wasn't really having a very good year, wasn't really getting on base. And all of a sudden now moved him to leadoff spot, and he's, become one of their best players, and is hitting home runs and drawing walks and looks like the Justin Upton of old. So that's been a big thing. I think Upton getting on base and setting that tone atop the lineup's been huge. They've been scoring runs early in games, kind of like Matt likes to say, kind of punching them in the mouth, and then kind of having that first punch there and kind of going from there. And it's been a good strategy. I mean, it was tough going into Oakland in that first game. Bundy just didn't have it, and truthfully just hasn't really had it in most of his starts this year. So that's been an issue. But we've seen Patrick Sandoval step up too, and we'll see what happens when Quintana's healthy.
Yeah, I want to talk about those guys in a minute, but you talked about Upton and his leadoff spot. Have you or any of the other reporters kind of talked to him, like a post game or anything? Has he said what has clicked for him in that position? Is it just something that maybe it would have happened regardless, just because of the more at bats and just coincidentally happened in the leadoff spot, or is there something that he has said that is really helping him starting out a game batting first?
He's talked about it a little bit and said that the change in approach maybe a little bit, just because you're a leadoff hitter. You want to see a little bit more pitches for your, other, teammates, that kind of thing, especially early in the game. But really, it hasn't changed too much. It is hard to know, if it's completely a coincidence or not. But it is pretty amazing. You look at the stats, and up until that point, and then until that point, it's been a completely different, you know what I mean? Stats. I mean, he's just been a completely different player. So I do think a little bit of his mentality-wise, just because I think that's what Madden was saying too, was that he's done this in the past with Evan Longoria with the Rays and Chris Bryant with the Cubs, and I think Javier Baez with the Cubs. They might have been scuffing a little bit, and then he moves them up to number one to kind of change their perspective, and sure enough, they start producing. So we'll see. As of right now, I think they're going to stick with him in the leadoff spot for the foreseeable future because he's doing so well with it. And Fletcher's obviously having a much better season as a number 9 hitter than he was as a leadoff hitter too. So I still think Fletcher is a leadoff hitter like in the future, but I think as of right now, he's doing well in the 9 hole. He had 4 hits on Monday, and I think that Upton's been so good in the leadoff hole, really might as well leave him there.
Yeah, I kind of mentioned him being like a prototypical leadoff man. I think he draw 3 walks in Arizona during the game. So definitely something that you didn't expect from Upton this year. So we kind of talked about it a little bit. You talked about some of those starting rotation arms. I want to talk about Bundy first. We're recording this Tuesday afternoon, right after the Monday game in Oakland, where Bundy really seemed to struggle and has really seemed to struggle all season long. What do you think it's been, for Bundy, having a great 2020 and kind of pretty much really high hopes fan-wise, anticipation of him this year kind of being that frontline starter, and just have not been able to put a good start together? Is it something, that is just maybe it's catching up to him because it was such a short season last year, or is there some kind of fundamentals wrong with him?
Yeah, I think last season he just was much better at locating the ball. I think that he was hitting the edges more, and that slider was such a good pitch. He got a lot of strikeouts to that pitch. It was kind of his out pitch. He was able to get ahead of hitters and locate in areas that, hitters weren't driving the ball. I think he only gave up 5 home runs all of last season. This year, in just one more start, he's given up, I think, 14 home runs, I think, in 12 starts this year. So I think he's just given up a lot more big hits, and he talked about it after the game, saying he's leaving way too many pitches over the middle. He's been working to try to, remedy that. He's had a lot of bullpen sessions trying to, polish his command, get better control, get kind of back to what he was last year. And then, even on Monday, his velocity was down, his spin rates were down. Just didn't really look like the same guy he was last year, and was hit hard as a result. And we've seen it happen, a lot. Ever since the start of May, I think his ERA is above 9. So I mean, he's given up more than a run per inning since May. So in April, I think he had like a 4.2 or 4.5 ERA, and looked kind of like that same Bundy, and even earlier in the year looked pretty good. And truthfully, the A's are a team that he usually dominates, and so to see him kind of get hit around like that was not a good sign. And like I said earlier, he's got to get it going, because if not, maybe they put Quintana in the spot and keep Sandoval in the rotation. Still a little too early to say that because Quintana hasn't started his rehab assignment or anything yet. But if Bundy turns in a couple more rough ones, it's how much longer you can continue to go with a guy that's has an ERA above 9 over his last 7 starts or so.
And you said the magic word, spin rate, and that's kind of been the big thing in the news, MLB wise, for the last couple weeks, is the crackdown on foreign substances. The MLB says they're going to start implicating soon. I believe a report came out today, actually, that it's going to be in a couple weeks or sometime in July, early July, I believe. Is that a coincidence? Is that something that you're seeing drop, not only from Bundy, but like from the other pitchers as well?
Yeah, I mean, Bundy even had lower spin rates in his last start against the Royals. Was actually a good one. But yes, in general, I mean, not even just Angels pitchers, but across the league, you look at it, and spin rates are definitely down the last 2 weeks, and ERAs are up. So it could be a coincidence, but I highly doubt it, considering MLB's kind of been saying the last few weeks they're trying to crack down on that a little bit more. We'll start punishing players for having these crazy spin rates that are maybe higher than their career averages that seem to be aided by these substances that are creating these pitches that are really almost unhittable. And even Justin Upton was telling me that he'd been playing baseball in the majors now for over a decade, and he'd seen pitches this year and even last year that he'd never seen before in terms of the way they moved. So it got to the point now, I think it became where the batting averages were historically low. And even since June started, I think the average batting average has gone up by I think it's over 12 points or something like that. So all the numbers are kind of showing that it is making an effect that these pitchers are trying different substances, like in terms of now just, regular pine tar or resin, stuff that's more legal. And there was even a report in ESPN saying that teams now are like having to have their relievers and pitchers throw extra bullpen sessions just to try to figure out how to throw without the sticky stuff.
Right.
So it's kind of sad that we're having to have these pitchers kind of relearn how to do it. But it's one of those things where it's hard to blame the pitchers. This was something that was at their disposal. It wasn't something they could get really penalized for. The league was kind of looking the other way. But now I think it was, past time, but about time for them to crack down. And we'll see if they can kind of come up with a better solution going forward. Maybe some sort of substance that is universally approved that all pitchers can use. That's not going to really improve your spin rate, but does improve your grip, because you still don't want to see hit batters. We saw 4 of them
last night.
On Monday, including Chad Penner get hit in the head. So hitters want the pitchers to have a good grip, but they don't want them to have a grip that's also going to spin the ball off and make it go crazy what plays it's not supposed to go.
And that's interesting you say that too about the grip, because even, prior to the last, month and a half, when this whole talk of the foreign substance thing came up, hits batsmen were up even before that. Do you think, and this is me thinking about it, the hit batsman is more of a result of pitchers coming in and trying to throw as hard as they can and not necessarily working on the command? And now it might even get worse or they're going to have to, retool themselves to really focus now on trying to hit their spots, not just trying to blow it by guys.
Yeah, that's a good point. I do think that's been an issue in baseball too, is that so many pitchers now are just max effort guys. That's kind of what the big, thing is just trying to chase velocity, right? You go to these labs in the off season, or even if you're in college or you're a prospect, and you try to just find velocity, and there's ways to do it, but it comes at a price of you not really knowing where it's going sometimes, or really having really good command. Because we do know that velocity plays, and the higher, for guys to throw 100 miles per hour, it's going to be hard to hit, and the numbers support that. So I get why people chase that velocity, but at the same time, it can come with a price, and we've seen guys get hit because of it. And I think too, we've seen pitchers go away from throwing inside effectively, I think, in recent years. I think maybe this year they tried to go back inside a little bit more, but don't really even know how to do it because they just hadn't really done it in the past and don't have the control to do it. So we'll see. I mean, that is the one thing that is kind of crazy, is the fact that hit by pitchers were still up by a lot this year, despite the fact that these pitchers were using these grips, and now they're not going to have these grips anymore, and see if that's going to get even worse. So that's going to be the scary thing, I guess. But we'll see. I think pitchers are definitely have to start learning how to throw strikes more and rely more on their natural ability than having sticky stuff that can kind of make the ball move in crazy ways.
Sports Illustrated had a cover story, I believe, and they kind of compared the spider tech and all that stuff to like the new steroids. Do you think, even though it's probably not as long as the steroids era, but do you think like in 5-10 years or whatever, we'll look back at this time and kind of look at pitchers during this time that had really good years and kind of be like, yeah, but kind of like the conversation with steroids?
It's possible, especially if some of these guys really fall off. If some of these guys that we've seen have really high spin rates based on substances. If Garrett Cole, for example, or Trevor Bauer, or even guys now that have been linked to it, like Kluber or Wainwright, or some of these older guys also that Scherzer has been linked to it now too. That if those guys' numbers kind of fall off pretty hard in the next couple of years, that maybe that was proof these guys were getting an unfair advantage. So it's definitely worth monitoring the big name guys like Bauer and Cole, especially those two. They're kind of the ones that have been in the forefront of it since Bauer kind of accused Cole of using it multiple years ago, back when he was on the Astros. Yeah. But if those spin rates drop off the table, and they both their spin rates have dropped in recent weeks, and if they drop like that and then their effectiveness goes with it, then we'll kind of see, that was a little bit of a different. And Shane Bieber too. I mean, these guys his spin rates were down, but obviously he also just went on the DL with a shoulder injury, so that could have been it as well. But we'll see. I mean, some of these guys with some of these numbers inflated a bit by these substances, and I guess we'll find out with time.
So obviously, that's kind of the baseball MLB wide kind of situation, but kind of going back now to the younger arms, and you talked about if Bundy doesn't kind of get it going, you can see Quintana maybe taking a spot. But what about like a Jose Suarez, who has been in certain situations, pitched like 4 innings, 5 innings, and like in long relief, and has done really well? Is there a chance where it's almost like a Patrick Sandoval, where Ohtani had his traffic issue last time they were in Oakland? Patrick gets the start, does really well, but then continues to kind of build off that. Could you see like a Jose Suarez taking the place of a Bundy if he keeps on throwing clunkers out there and Quintana's not quite ready?
I could see that. I mean, I think right now that Quintana's probably going to come back sooner than that. So I think that at this point, it's more likely to have a decision. I think Quintana probably might be ready in let's say 10 days to 2 weeks, maybe 2 weeks, probably more likely or so. Because if he started a rehab assignment, maybe he makes him make 1 or 2 starts down there. So I think that once it gives Bundy a couple more turns, by then they'll know more if Bundy's turned it around and if Quintana can just replace him, or if they want to do with Sandoval. But you're right, though. Suarez has definitely put himself in that picture, especially if anyone else goes down or gets hurt, or they need a spot to start or anything like that, or even if later in the season they want to insert him in there, it could happen. I mean, he's definitely been a much different pitcher than he's been in the past, and people forget that he's still a pretty young kid. He debuted at 21, and we know that he had a rough year as a rookie in 2019, and last year only made a couple of appearances, and they were both pretty terrible. But this year his command's much better. He's always had pretty good stuff, and there's a reason why. But ESPN had him in their top 100 prospects, before 2019. So it's not like he's some scrub or some guy that doesn't have a track record. He had a very good track record in the minor leagues. He just had some scuffles as a young guy in the majors that probably wasn't ready to be there either in 2019. And sure enough, now that he's got some experience under his belt and is throwing the ball with better command and knowing where it's going, he's been a really good reliever. And I think right now it's nice to have him as a long reliever that can kind of fill in those innings. But you're right, going forward, there's at least a chance later in the season he could be in the rotation.
And something that I've seen on my Twitter, and I'm sure you've probably seen on your Twitter and social media, is another young pitcher that people are hoping to be in the starting rotation at some point this year, and that's Chris Rodriguez coming in, doing great. Just coming back off an injury, though. Is there a plan for him to start at some point this year, or is Joe and Perrion kind of holding off on that and just let him kind of get innings right now as a reliever?
Yeah, I think right now, this season especially, it's just going to be him being a reliever. Just because, he had the injury history in the past, had only thrown, 9 1/3 professional innings since 2017. So just not enough innings for him to go be a starter and build up this year. So I think right now they'll be smart about him and use him as kind of like that long relief or that multi-inning reliever but in big spots, obviously, coming in close games for 2 innings, maybe potentially even 3. He's done that too. But I think right now, to monitor his innings going forward, he's only going to be a reliever this year, but his stuff, though, profiles as a starter. So I think next year there's a very good chance he'll come into camp competing for a spot as a starter, because we do know, too, this rotation needs to be completely remade. You look at all the guys who are going to be free agents. Heaney's going to be a free agent, and Bundy's going to be a free agent. Quintana's going to be a free agent. Cobb's going to be a free agent. So you got to replace some of these guys, and obviously they can do it via trades or free agent signings, but they're also going to need some guys to step into that rotation, and he could be one of those guys. And I said Suarez could be one of those guys. Maybe Sandoval could be one of those guys too, and at some point too, Reed Detmer, so that there is some of that depth, but clearly they're going to need to get some help this offseason, pitching-wise, like always. But I do think that Rodriguez is a guy that can maybe count on in the future. It's just all about him staying healthy.
And you mentioned all those guys that are up at the end of the year. I think it's safe to say, unless Quintana has some kind of crazy second half of the season, he's probably not coming back. But as far as Bundy, Cobb, and Heaney especially, has there been any kind of conversations about an extension? Have the Angels kind of talked about maybe leaning towards one guy or another, or just kind of letting them all go play the market?
I think right now, kind of let them go to the market a little bit more. They haven't had any real extension talks that I'm aware of with any of those guys. But you're right, it is interesting. Heaney's been around for so long.
Right.
Would they be inclined to bring him back just because he's been around, and obviously I think enjoys being around the organization. Cobb has a good tie to Joe Madden, and then Cobb really has been pitching a lot better recently. Would he be amenable to want to stay in Anaheim as well? So Quintana, you never know. I mean, it's still kind of early with that one too. And Bundy was a guy that I think a lot of people wanted to extend before the season.
Last year.
Before this season, everyone thought extend Bundy. At this point, clearly that's not going to happen. And he's really costing himself a lot of money in free agency. I mean, I think he's more likely to go out there maybe now, unless he really turns it around, and go out there and get a 1-year deal. Maybe it would be with the Angels as 1 more year to try to take a chance on yourself, but it might be somewhere else, just a flyer, a 1 or 2 year deal, some team thinking they can kind of fix him. So as of right now, it's hard to know what they'll do with those guys. It's a little too early in the process, but they're going to make some big decisions after the season.
So we're coming up to the All-Star game, and then right after the All-Star game is probably the next biggest event is the trade deadline. And obviously, like we mentioned, Trout's been out for a while now. The team is still kind of treading water. And as we record this, again, we're recording it Tuesday afternoon. Angels are at 500, seven games back of the division, and only 4.5 of the last wild card spot. What do you believe they'll have to what area do you think they'll have to be in to be buyers at the trade deadline? How far back can they afford to be?
I think probably right around here. I think if they're within maybe 3 to 5 games of the second wild card spot, they can maybe go for it a little bit. Maybe try to get some relief help or whatever else I think they kind of need to kind of go forward. I wouldn't see them being like, big splash or big spenders at the deadline because of that. Because I don't, unless they go on a really big run leading up to them, I don't really see them being like too close in contention. But and if they fall off, they'll have some interesting decisions too, because we talked about all those starters that are going to be free agents, and you also have Rizal Iglesias as the closer is going to be a free agent, and he might be pretty valuable on that trade market, especially with the way he's been pitching recently. So it could go either way. Truthfully, at this point, they could obviously go on a nice little run here and put themselves back, like they have, and be in contention and try to be buyers and get some pitching, or maybe they fall back off and decide that they have to sell. So it's going to be up to them the next few weeks here. We know that Trout's probably not going to be back until after the All-Star break, the way it sounds. So it's going to be tough. They're going to have to do this without him into mid-July here. So far, so good. Like you talked about earlier, they have been playing a lot better, but they got to keep it up. And this A's series is really big, and they got to prove that they can beat the good teams because they have beaten the bad teams, which they need to do. They beat the Royals, they beat the Diamondbacks, but they got to beat the good teams too. And right now, the A's just seem to have their number.
Yeah, the A's definitely aren't going away anytime soon with the Angels, and it seems like they've been playing them a lot recently. I just felt like they were just up in Oakland like not too long ago. But you can talk about the trade deadline. Someone, I forgot who reported it, or Max Stassi, like we mentioned before, has been on fire since coming back from his concussion. Is that a guy that if the Angels do find themselves out of the playoff situation, would they look to shop around, or is that catching position so hard to find a good catcher that can do both, offensive and defensively, that they're going to hold on to him, even though that might be the biggest, something they can get back for?
Yeah, I think at this point you have to keep Stassi because, like you said, it's so hard to find good catching these days. It's funny, the best catchers in baseball are like all the old guys right now. It's like, Buster Posey's having a great year, Yadier Molina. Some of these older guys are
Salvador Perez
is having a great year with the Royals. It's kind of funny that all of a sudden all the veterans are having the good years, because otherwise it's hard to find a good hitting catcher these days. And Stassi's proven that, going back to last season. He had a breakout year in 2020. It was a shortened season. You weren't really sure if it was for real. But this year so far, he's proving it wasn't really a fluke. And he's still having for a few more years of control. It's not like he's going to be a free agent this year. So to me, I think he's a guy you want to build around going forward. And he said he would probably bring back a Hall, which is pretty impressive considering at the time, they got him for just 2, I think, Dominican prospects from the Astros.
Yeah.
And no one I'd never heard of, to be honest. And I think, Stassi that year was truthfully not hitting at all. So it's pretty amazing the way he's turning around his career and his value. But I think his value right now is too big for the Angels to trade.
I put on our Instagram, Halo_Haven, questions to ask Rhett. One of them came up and it made me think about it. Does the shift actually work for the Angels? Because it seems like someone put numbers out there where it seems like they're shifting more and it's actually paying off more with the recent kind of win streak.
Yeah, that's one of the things. Absolutely. Early on in the year, their shifting and their positioning was not working. And I do wonder if their outfield positioning, because their outfield numbers were terrible. Mm-hmm. I wonder if they had the positions wrong, because just the baseballs were different. They didn't account for the fact that these balls aren't going as far. I think if you look across baseball right now, teams are playing their outfielders more in than they have in recent years because the balls aren't flying as much. So there's less balls that are dropping in front of them. Whereas I think the Angels, we've seen it too much this year, where balls dropping in front of the outfielders that would have been outs for, I think, a lot of other teams. And then same thing infield-wise. I think they did looked at some more data, and all of a sudden now that their batting average on ground balls against the Angels now is one of the best in baseball after it was one of the worst in baseball. So clearly whatever it was they saw in the data, they corrected it. I mean, did it take too long? I don't know. I mean, there wasn't a pretty long period of time there where they had pretty much the worst defense in baseball. And all of a sudden now it's back to what we thought it was going to be, right? We thought it was going to be a decent defense.
Mm-hmm.
Rendon and Iglesias are both solid, and Fletcher, Walsh is pretty good at first base. Like, Trout's, some of the metrics don't love Trout too much, but he's still decent in center. And we know about Upton, and then right field was kind of more of a, you never knew who was going to play there anyway when Fowler went down. But it's funny that, it was one of the worst defenses in baseball. And sure enough, now it's back to being, at least a little bit above average. And sure enough, the pitching's been better and they've been winning more. So we'll see if they continue to have the places, players in the right spot. But it did seem like early in the year that the players in the wrong spot. And all of a sudden now it's starting to kind of come back in their favor.
And you kind of mentioned the right field, and it's kind of been a revolving door once Fowler went down early. I think it was like the second series or third series of the year really early. You have Wong, you have Taylor Ward out there, you had Rojas out there for a bit. I mean, it just seems like a constant rotation of people out there. But one name that a lot of fans are kind of clamoring for right now, especially with his numbers you see out in AAA, and that's Jo Adell. I believe to this point he still leads the AAA level with home runs. Has there been talk about bringing Joe up, maybe speeding up that process because he is on fire offensively in AAA?
There's definitely talk about him pretty much daily, I think, among the front office about when he's going to be ready. But they're trying to be a little bit cautious with him. They just know that with the way last year went, they don't want to have a repeat of that. The strikeouts are still up at AAA, which is a little bit of an issue. The defense is still can be a little bit spotty out there too, so they want to make sure that's all kind of cleaned up before he's brought up. It's like Perry said, that they want him to come up this time and stay up forever instead of be a guy who's kind of up and down trying to find his way. So I think they're trying to get him, a little bit more ready. But I do think pretty soon now he's got to come up just because of the way he's producing, especially with the power. Juan Lagares is fielding capably in center. He's been a very good defender. Hit his first home run, on Monday, and has had some big hits, but really hasn't really hit overall very well this year. But I think Taylor Ward's actually done a decent job in the right. But I do think that right now, I think that Adell at some point, maybe in July, could make some sense and come up and maybe provide a spark or a boost for the second half and see if he can kind of provide some power there. Maybe they'll put him down, maybe seventh hitter or somewhere lower in the lineup, so not let much pressure, but let him kind of see if he can have that power develop at the major league level as well.
I mean, the way Madden does it, why not just put him on leadoff? That seems
right,
to be working pretty well. We see how that works. Another question too, someone put on there is, and I didn't know they were doing this until I actually went to a Salt Lake B game in Vegas. Matt Thaiss behind the plate. Is that something they were doing because they needed a catcher at AAA Salt Lake, or is that something they're seriously looking back into, moving him back to behind the plate for the future seasons?
It's just to add to his versatility. We've seen Taylor Ward do the same thing, even in spring training, catch a little bit. And for Thaiss too, even if he's just more of a backups catcher, it's still a good thing to have an emergency catcher on your roster. I don't think he's going to ever go back to being a full-time catcher, but like we talked about earlier, there isn't much catching out there at the majors, and truthfully, the Angels don't really have much in the way of minor league catching depth either in terms of major leaguers. That's why they had to go out and get Drew Butera for a little bit, and they had Jack Kruger up for a little bit, and I think lost him on waivers, but they don't really have that much catching depth in their own system. So I think it just made sense to have Thaiss try to add to that, and that's something that Madden's really emphasized with some of the guys like Ward and Thaiss. Some of these guys just to kind of continue to have them play multiple positions because he thinks it'll help them find a role going forward, and then maybe they become a regular in another position, but at least try to have the versatility so you can offer more to the team when you do come up.
Now we're in June. MLB draft is ahead of us. This will be Perry's first draft as Angels GM, and it always seems like in GM's past they've had a type, whether it be the college standout kind of high floor, low ceiling kind, or a high school super athlete like you see with like Jo Adell, Brandon Marsh, Jordan Adams. Has Perry kind of tipped his hand one way or the other what he prefers to see in a draft pick?
Not really. We asked about his draft philosophy a little bit in our last Zoom with him, I think maybe 2 weeks ago. He talked to us more about he's one of those guys too, which I think most baseball people are. It's kind of more of a best player available type of thing, where you're not trying to look for a specific type, especially early on, because you just kind of want to find the best player. Because even if you have depth at that position in the major leagues, most of these guys take several years to come to the major leagues anyway, and things can change during that time period. But I do think that I think they're going to probably try to target pitching. I'm sure. You never know. Maybe Kumar Rocker could drop from the Vanderbilt pitcher. You never know. I think that's maybe the fans' biggest hope. But yeah, I think that if you look back, I think the Braves did a good job of developing young pitching. A lot of high school draft picks too. So I think that's going to be a pretty big target for them, and just trying to rebuild their pitching. But I do think too, I wouldn't shock me though if there's a middle infielder, up the middle guy that they love. Their first pick too, they could take. They've been doing that a lot recently too. But I do think, obviously, as we all know, pitching is going to be a big thing for them going forward.
Angel fans would love to hear another middle infielder or an outfielder picked with their first round draft this year. But no, you're right. I mean, it's so hard to tell what the team needs is going to be in 3 years if all these young starting pitchers hit. The Suarez's, the Detmers, Canning. Like if the majority of those guys hit, you're not going to need as big as starting pitching as you do as we sit right here. So it'll be interesting to see. So I noticed with you on the road again, a lot more traveling for you guys in the media. Just for people that don't quite understand that, how does that help your job? Help you do your job and pass on information from the players or coaches to us fans?
Well, I think the big thing is just now that we're able to interview the players in the field is a big thing. Before it was all through Zooms. So now we can do one-on-ones with the players. So instead of having to worry about being in a Zoom with other reporters, you don't want to, take up too much time with questions or even just ask something that you want to know specifically for your own story, like a scoop type of thing. It's harder to ask that. You can't get one-on-one info, even about the team. It's just a big thing about being on a beat is just building trust with the players so that you can find out things from them and talk to them and whether it's stuff about themselves or the team, whatever. It's just better if you can build that relationship and they can trust you when they tell you that, rather than being on a Zoom computer with other people on that they don't even know. So I think it just makes it a lot easier to actually do this stuff on the field. I think pretty soon now that we're all traveling, that I think a lot of these Zooms are going to go away. Hopefully, I think that we'll stop doing the Zooms with the players. Pretty much Zooms have gone away pregame. It's all now just whoever you want to talk to on the field. We still do Madden via Zoom pregame, but even that might go away as we can get Madden in person on the field. I think postgame we still might do Zooms the way it's been going, just because I don't think we're getting the clubhouse access quite yet. I don't know if it'll come this year or maybe next year. But that's a big part of the job too. I think obviously that's what we all want on the beat, is to be back in the clubhouse. But we understand why for now it can't happen. But yeah, I think just being there means a lot to be able to see it in person, but also just more than anything, just the access with the players and with Madden to be there and to talk to them in person really enhances the coverage. And you can find out more about what's really going on with the team, what's going on with that player, get to know the player better, tell their story better. It just makes for an overall better, experience for everyone. And the players don't like going on the Zoom rooms, and nobody really does. So I think it's just a lot better to be able to do these in person, and it's just a lot less awkward, and it's just nice to be kind of back in person like that.
Yeah, I know as fans, we enjoy seeing you guys on the field. Gooby was on the field, at Angel Stadium when they were in town, but now to see you guys, and obviously you, Jeff Fletcher, the other beat writers, not the one that went to LA. We're not going to mention. Yeah, we're not going to mention his name. Albert Pujols' best buddy, I guess. I don't know, because it seemed to happen like 2-3 days after that. But it's great to see you guys on the field and interacting with the players again because of that. A one-on-one you guys can talk to with some of the guys, and it's funny too because you think about there's some guys on the team that you have not probably even met because it's been so long since the shutdown and just the restrictions that you guys have had. Yeah,
the new guys basically. I just met Alex Cobb for the first time a few days ago. It's funny. Like I didn't even talk to Madden in person, face to face until I think on last homestand. It would have been like last Wednesday or something like that. It was the first time I talked to Joe face to face in spring training of 2019. Otherwise, it was all through Zoom, and a lot of Zooms. I mean, we're talking to Joe. That's the thing about being a manager. So you talk to them more than you talk to your parents. I mean, it's like twice a day. So it's a lot. So, I mean, to have Joe via Zoom that much, it's just funny all of a sudden now to finally talk to him in person after all this time. And he was even joking to Jack Harris, the LA Times new reporter, that he was like, "Oh, Jack, you look a lot taller than I even thought." He'd never even met Jack before.
That's funny.
At least he had met, Fletch and I from the spring training in 2019. Mm-hmm. Sorry, 2020. I'm sorry. Spring training in 2020, I hadn't seen him. But yeah, so it'd been over a year though since I'd seen Joe and talked to him in person. So it's just kind of nice to have that back.
Yeah, it's kind of like when you meet athletes for the first time and you just see them on TV, and the next thing you know, you stand up next to them, you're like, "Wow, you're actually really tall."
Yeah, really big, like Lagares. That's what.
Yeah, but because they're always because they're always around like other tall dudes that you just don't. There's no depth to tell the difference, and all of a sudden they stand next to you, and you're like, okay.
Yeah, it's like the biggest one, Shohei. Even for fans that go to games.
Like,
when you see Shohei in person, even if you're in the stands, you're like, oh, he's much bigger than he even looks on TV. Like he's just like a huge human being in person, no matter what. I mean, so on TV he looks big too, and he is, but like in person, just doesn't do him justice till you see him in person. Especially if you're up right next to him, he's just a monster. Yeah, it's hilarious.
Yeah, so it's great to see you guys on the field interacting and bringing those stories to us fans. So definitely check them out. Follow him on Twitter if you do not already. That's at Rhett Bollinger on Twitter. Set up your alerts. When something comes out, be the first to hear about it on your phone or tablet or whatever you want to do. So definitely check it out. Again, that's at Rhett Bollinger on Twitter. And then obviously you can read his stories on MLB.com, just under the Angels page. It's really easy to find. So Rhett, thanks again. From up in Oakland in your hotel room, really appreciate it, and hope to do this again around All-Star break.
Yeah, let me know. I'm always down to do this. Always fun.
And I want to thank Rhett again for dropping by and talking a little bit of Angels baseball so far at this point in the season. It was great talking to him, catching up with him. Like I mentioned in the interview, the last time we talked to him was during spring training, right before the season started. So a lot has happened since then. We will have him on again at the All-Star break, hopefully in person. We're talking about a little bit of that off air. So hopefully we can make that happen. Another thing, I was talking to him off air that I meant to ask him during the interview, and that was Ohtani and the All-Star, week kind of festivities, whether it's him pitching or him hitting or even, the home run derby. And he had said that the Angels would be open to it. Obviously, Ohtani has not said one way or the other. He was talking about the press, the beat writers and those guys are hoping to talk to Ohtani in the next couple of days to kind of get his thoughts about it. But as of right now, it has come out that the Angels would not be opposed to him doing the home run derby. And since it's up in Colorado, I think it would be a lot of fun to see him out there doing it, and obviously would help grow the game a lot more, seeing him taking some major hacks, trying to get to that third deck up on Coors Field. So that's something to keep a lookout for. And again, follow Rhett on Twitter at Rhett Bollinger. He'll post any kind of information he has, any new stories he has. Again, you can always find him also on MLB.com on the Angels page, the beat writer for the Angels. And so I want to thank him again. He's always been on the podcast. He's always been more than generous with his time. So again, really looking forward to having him back. Thank you again for watching this interview. Really appreciate it. And again, please subscribe, please send an alert, and please tell some friends. If you have some Angel buddies, family or friends, please tell them about this YouTube page. We're trying to grow our audience little by little, and really appreciate it. And if you have any other ideas, maybe who you want to see be interviewed, we'll try our best. But you can always email us at allangelspodcast@gmail.com. Again, that's allangelspodcast@gmail.com. So I am Dallin Garcia. Thank you again for watching this interview, and have a great day.